Imagine boarding a routine passenger flight and less than an hour later, every voice inside the cockpit suddenly disappears. The aircraft continues flying on autopilot, carrying 121 people across Europe with no one responding to radio calls. Fighter jets race alongside the airliner, only to witness a scene that no pilot expected to see. What they discovered inside that cockpit would shock the aviation world and forever change airline safety. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Helios Airways Flight 522. This documentary is based on publicly available investigation reports, historical records, and verified sources. It is created solely for educational and documentary purposes.
At 37,000 feet above Europe, a Boeing 737 was still flying perfectly. But inside the aircraft,
Air traffic controllers called the cockpit again and again, but no one answered. The aircraft continued following its programmed route, as if an invisible pilot was still in control. With every passing minute, the silence became more disturbing. No one on the ground knew if anyone inside the aircraft was still conscious. As radio contact failed completely, the Greek Air Force scrambled F-16 fighter jets to intercept the mysterious aircraft. When the fighter pilots finally reached Flight 522, what they witnessed inside would become one of aviation history's most chilling discoveries. The fighter pilots immediately realized something was terribly wrong. The captain wasn't responding, and the first officer remained completely motionless at the controls. Then the fighter pilots noticed something unexpected. One person was still moving inside the aircraft, offering a final glimmer of hope. Who was the lone person still moving inside Flight 522? And could this final act of courage prevent an unimaginable disaster? To understand how an entire passenger jet became a ghost flight, we must go back to the very beginning. Because the truth didn't begin in the sky, it began on the ground. Everything began like an ordinary summer morning. At Larnaca Airport, Flight 522 was being prepared for what should have been a routine journey. Hours before takeoff, technicians completed a routine maintenance inspection, unaware that one small setting would later change everything. Investigators would later discover that the cabin pressurization selector had been left in manual mode instead of auto. At 9:07 that morning, Helios Airways Flight 522 lifted into the sky with no one on board aware that the tragedy had already begun. The climb appeared completely normal. Flight 522 continued gaining altitude, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then a warning horn suddenly echoed through the cockpit. It was the first sign that something was seriously wrong. The crew searched for the source of the alarm. "Where's that alarm coming from?" Checking the overhead. Nothing. The screens are all green. "I don't get it!" But investigators later concluded did not recognize it. As the aircraft climbed higher, the oxygen inside the cabin slowly decreased, while those on board had no idea what was happening. As the aircraft climbed higher, the first effects of oxygen deprivation began to appear. At first, they were almost impossible to notice. Unlike smoke or fire, hypoxia arrives silently. As oxygen levels fall, the brain slowly loses its ability to think clearly. On the ground, air traffic controllers continued calling Flight 522, but every transmission was met with complete silence. "Flight 522, this is center. Do you copy? Flight 522, respond immediately." High above Europe, Flight 522 continued exactly as programmed, unaware that every passing minute was bringing it closer to disaster. Inside the cockpit, the effects of hypoxia were becoming more severe. Every decision became slower and every second more dangerous. Controllers called again and again, but Flight 522 never answered. The silence was now impossible to ignore. "Flight 522, this is center. Radio check. Still nothing. It's moving erratically. Keep trying." Flight 522 reached the skies above Athens, but instead of preparing to land, it simply continued flying. By now, what had started as a routine flight had become a national emergency. The next decision would send fighter jets into the sky. "Target is escalating. We have to act. Scramble the fighters now." As Flight 522 continued flying without a single response, the Greek Air Force made a decision that would change the investigation forever. Within minutes, two F-16 fighter jets roared into the sky, racing to intercept the silent Boeing. The closer the fighters came, the stranger the situation became. Flight 522 showed no sign that it even knew they were there. When the fighter pilots looked inside the cockpit, they immediately realized this wasn't a hijacking. Something far more terrifying had happened. Then the fighter pilots spotted a single person still moving through the cabin, carrying what appeared to be a portable oxygen bottle. The lone flight attendant finally reached the cockpit. Investigators believe he attempted to regain control of the aircraft using the remaining oxygen supply. But by then, time was running out. The aircraft had already been flying for hours, and its fuel supply was nearly exhausted. Moments later, the first engine flamed out. Without fuel, the aircraft could no longer remain in controlled flight for much longer. As the remaining fuel disappeared, Flight 522 entered its final descent. The outcome could no longer be changed. The rescue mission had ended, but the investigation was only beginning. Every answer now depended on the evidence left behind. Investigators now turned to the aircraft's two silent witnesses, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. The evidence pointed toward one small switch. After maintenance, the cabin pressurization selector had been left in manual instead of auto. Without automatic pressurization, the cabin slowly lost breathable air. The danger wasn't sudden, it was almost invisible. By combining radar data, maintenance records, and cockpit recordings, investigators reconstructed every critical moment of Flight 522. The mystery was finally becoming clear. This tragedy was not caused by a single failure, but by a chain of small mistakes that no one stopped in time. After months of analysis, investigators reached a clear conclusion. The disaster was not caused by terrorism or engine failure, but by a catastrophic chain of human errors. A single pressurization selector left in the wrong position became the first link in a chain that ended with the loss of 121 lives. The tragedy led to renewed attention on pilot training, warning recognition, and cabin pressurization procedures throughout the aviation industry. Understood. Initiating checklist. The mystery had finally been solved, but the human story behind Flight 522 was only beginning. While nearly everyone on board had lost consciousness, one trained crew member was still fighting to stay alive. With every step toward the cockpit, the responsibility of 121 lives rested on his shoulders. Beyond that cockpit door lay the final chance to change the outcome. Inside the cockpit, the aircraft was still flying exactly as designed, but no one was truly in control anymore. For the first time, he could finally see the entire situation. The aircraft was still flying, but time was running out. He wasn't a captain, but every decision now depended on understanding what the aircraft was doing. From outside the aircraft, the fighter pilots witnessed something unexpected. Someone inside the cockpit was still trying to save Flight 522. But while hope still remained inside the cockpit, the aircraft itself was running out of time. For a few final moments, one crew member carried the responsibility of an entire aircraft alone. The fighter pilots watched in silence, knowing there was nothing they could do except witness history unfold. Moments later, Flight 522 disappeared from the sky. The rescue attempt had reached its final chapter. His courage couldn't change the outcome, but it became one of the most unforgettable moments in aviation history. The investigation would now reveal how future lives could be protected. The lessons learned from Flight 522 didn't remain inside investigation files. They became part of how future pilots would be trained. Modern aviation now depends on multiple layers of verification, ensuring that critical systems are checked again and again before every flight. Every improvement in aviation safety is written because investigators refuse to stop asking why. Flight 522 became more than an aviation accident. It became a reminder that every lesson learned has the power to save lives. Every commercial flight relies on thousands of safety decisions made long before passengers ever step on board. Today, every critical aircraft system is verified repeatedly because experience has shown that even small details can matter.
Engine inspection complete. Cockpit checks verified.
The purpose of every investigation is not simply to explain the past, but to protect the future. Flight 522 may be one of aviation's most important lessons, but history still holds many mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Millions of people trust commercial aviation every day, often without realizing how many lives and lessons shaped the safety standards behind every flight. Every successful flight is supported by thousands of professionals working together long before the aircraft ever leaves the runway. The greatest legacy of Flight 522 isn't how the story ended, it's how its lessons continue protecting lives every single day. The investigation is complete. The mystery has been explained, but the evidence will continue protecting future generations. Every investigation eventually reaches its conclusion, but its lessons continue long after the final report is written. Flight 522 is remembered not only because of what happened, but because of what the aviation world learned from it. Every new generation of pilots trains with knowledge earned through investigations like this one.
Emergency pressurization checklist complete. Confirmed. Monitoring cabin pressure. Good. Proceed.
Today, millions of passengers travel safely because aviation never stops learning from the past. Some stories become history, others become the reason history is never repeated. From a single overlooked detail, investigators uncovered lessons that continue protecting millions of passengers around the world. Behind every safe landing are thousands of safety decisions that passengers never see but always depend on. Closing a case doesn't erase the past, it preserves the knowledge needed to protect the future. Every mystery solved becomes another step toward understanding the world we live in. One investigation has reached its conclusion, but another mystery is already waiting to be uncovered. Every closed case becomes part of history, but history is never truly finished. Every mystery, no matter where it happened, begins with one question: what really happened? At USHT, every documentary is built from publicly available evidence, historical records, expert findings, and verified investigations, created to educate, preserve history, and inspire curiosity. The next case has already been selected, and its evidence may challenge everything you think you know. Thank you for joining this investigation. Until the next case file, keep asking questions, keep following the evidence, and remember, every mystery leaves behind a story waiting to be uncovered.